Brady has really he's reaching that level of stardom that's unsurpassed in the NFL. And Robert takes Brady to Israel. He takes him on a trip to Israel with his wife, Myra. At that point, keep in mind, Brady's still a single guy. He's not married yet. He doesn't have a family yet. They go to Israel together and they spend a week over there. And this is an incredible environment to start deepening the personal relationship that the two of them have. It becomes very important a few years later in 2010 when Brady's contract is expiring. He's now been a Patriot for a decade. He's gone through a serious knee injury, reconstructive surgery, and he's getting to the point in his career where if you look at the other great quarterbacks, Joe Montana, John Elway, Dan Marino, Steve Young, Brett Favre, he's on that trajectory, but he's getting older. And now you know at this point that the actuary charts are telling you that he only has a few years left in his prime. And he also knows that you look at Bill Belichick's track record over the years as players get up in age and their salaries have become so much larger. Lawyer Malloy, Ty Law, Willie McGinnis, Adam Vinatieri, right? We know the list. It's a heck of a list. He jettisons those players as they get to that point in their career. And this is where they have this big summit on Cape Cod where Kraft has a summer home. He brings Brady up there and they come to an agreement that they would not have been able to come to if they didn't have the familial relationship they had. In other words, this isn't a written contract. This is a gentleman's agreement that's made by looking each other in the eye and understanding that Robert Kraft is essentially going to protect Tom Brady. And this is really important to opening the door for Brady to remain in New England for another decade. I think when you read the book, you see that it would have been very possible, likely, and understandable for Brady to leave New England sometime around 2010 or shortly thereafter. And had he done that, he would have followed the path of Joe Montana. It would have been like almost exactly like what Joe did. So Kraft's relationship with Brady is what keeps Brady in New England for what would be basically the second half of the dynasty that produces 3 more Super Bowls beyond what they already had. And then the relationship that Kraft has with Belichick is the ultimate owner-coach relationship. It's unlike, if you look at Jerry Jones, for example, and the relationships he's had with coaches, or you could look at actually any other owner you want to look at, you can't find one that has nurtured the kind of efficiency and trust and reciprocity that exists between Belichick and Kraft. And that's been so instrumental to allowing Belichick to be who he is. He has moved on from a lot of players that an owner might emotionally want to keep in New England, but Kraft gives him the ability, the room to make those calls and then support his coach. I think that that's why the success formula has been what it's been for the last 20 years.
So one of the coolest things about Belichick, and one of the things that I respect most about him, is that he approaches each game, with a one-game mentality. I mean, you've heard the famous quote, "We're on to Cincinnati," and one 2-year job. And as a Hurricanes fan, and also as a Dallas Cowboy fan, expectations at the beginning of the season are always, championship or bust. We're always looking towards the postseason. And one of the things that I admire about Belichick is that mentality, just taking it one game at a time. How do you think that has affected the organization and his players for the better over time?
So On to Cincinnati is obviously one of the chapters in the book. And there's a great story in that chapter about after the Patriots got just destroyed by the Kansas City Chiefs on Monday Night Football. And everyone was writing them off and saying, not only is this season a bust, but the dynasty is finally over. Brady's finished. The team is not going to be good, blah, 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 blah. And Rob Gronkowski, I'll never forget this because this was an interview I did with with Gronkowski at his home, and he was explaining what was going on in the locker room after that game. And I don't mean moments after the game, but in the days after that loss to Kansas City, where Bill Belichick's performance in the press conference, where he deflected every single question about Tom Brady's age and whether he was losing it and all this stuff, the answer to every time was, we're on to Cincinnati, we're on to Cincinnati, we're on to Cincinnati. And what Gronkowski was explaining was, as a player in the locker room, that was a tremendous lesson to the players, but also a tremendous coaching feat by Belichick, because what it enabled all the players to do was to say to themselves, like, we don't need to focus on Kansas City. We need to focus on Cincinnati. We need to all focus on next week. And if the coach is focused on next week, we're just going to go with him. And we all know what happened to Cincinnati. The Patriots destroyed Cincinnati. And that game was the launch pad for an incredible run that they went on that year, that they ran it all the way to the Super Bowl. And I think that is the kind of thing that Belichick teaches by example, right? It's like another great story, one of my favorite stories in the book. This would go way back to when Brady was in his first year as a starter. So 2001, when they lose a game that they shouldn't have lost, and everybody knows it, and then they show up for practice, the first practice they had after that game, Belichick had dug a hole in the practice field, literally a hole in the ground, a bunch of dirt piled up next to it, like you would see in a cemetery when you dig a grave. And when the players arrived on the field, he had them all gather around, and then he put a football in the hole, and then he buried it with dirt. He had a shovel and he buried the football. It was like having a funeral for the game they had just lost, telling everybody in a very visual way, that is dead. It's behind us. And there was no one that had a bigger impact on than Tom Brady as a young first-year starter. That lesson that was taught to him very early on, which was, when the game is over, it's over. Like, whether you win by 100 points or lose by 100 points, it doesn't matter. It's done. Like, what matters is tomorrow. And I think the reason you know that mentality works is because if you look over the history of the dynasty, after every Super Bowl that they go to, what do you see Tom Brady and Rob Gronkowski and Julian Edelman talking about? They're talking about next year. They're talking about, like, that Super Bowl doesn't really matter anymore. What matters is what we do next year. It's really hard to get players to adopt or adapt that mentality, because that's so exhausting. Like, if you think about it, you tell someone for a whole year, the goal is to get to the top of the mountain. So you do everything you have to do to get there. And then as soon as you get there, you're like, wow, this was great. And then the helicopter comes and picks you up and takes you down to the bottom to give you the trophy. And then the coach says, okay, starting tomorrow, it's all about getting back to the top of the mountain. Well, most people would go, excuse me, can we just relax a little bit and enjoy this and, rest on our laurels a little bit? Well, in New England, they don't do that. And so it's a rare breed of players that are able to endure that kind of mentality. But that's Bill Belichick's mentality.
Wow. Well, so I guess one of the questions that I mentioned earlier, and I guess you touched on a little bit about the relationship between Bill and Tom Brady.
Yes.
So now that they've broken up, I was very interested to read, Rob Gronkowski's comments on coming back to the NFL, where he said, and I'm paraphrasing, I don't want to, say it totally the wrong way, but essentially that, like, he made it sound like New England stopped being fun for him, and so he quit football, and he was, looking forward to play again in a new situation. I'm more of a basketball guy, but I couldn't help but make parallels to what Kevin Love said about playing with LeBron James, where he's like, is it the funnest thing to do? No, but you're guaranteed a spot in the NBA Finals if you do it. So a lot of us, Like it's the trade-off that you make. And I'm wondering if that's kind of what it's like playing for Bill Belichick, and that's the sacrifice that these guys have been making to have this much success.
Well, I think one of the themes that you see in the narrative, it wasn't hard for me to think about how to structure this in the book, because what I was seeing is great player after great player that's come through New England. It is Lawyer Malloy, it is Ty Law and Willie McGinnis and Teddy Bruschi and Randy Moss and Wes Welker and, Ninkovich, and you just keep going through these guys, and then it becomes Edelman and Gronkowski and the next wave. There is it's tiring. It's physically, mentally, and emotionally exhausting to play with or for somebody who is the best in the world at what they do. So LeBron is that. Tom Brady is that. Bill Belichick is that. And so there's a scene in the book where Gronkowski is a rookie, and he is so frustrated and worn down by the demands that Tom Brady is putting on him in training camp and in practice that he is literally ready to punch Brady in the face. He literally is at the end of his rope because Brady is, relentlessly yelling at him in practice and relentlessly, sort of criticizing him. And I remember asking Gronkowski, how is Belichick in all of this? And he said Belichick loved it because Brady is doing basically Belichick's job for him. Like Belichick doesn't have to browbeat Gronkowski because Tom's doing it. So Bill's all for it. He likes that Tom is pushing Gronkowski to the brink. And the thing is, and this is, I think, what separates the great players, and Gronkowski is a great player. He's going to go down in history as, if not the greatest tight end who's ever played, he's in the conversation as one of three, right? He's right there. Yeah. And so not every tight end could withstand the withering criticism and intensity of Tom Brady. That's just not everybody's made for that. Yeah. And so, but Gronkowski eventually buys into it and understands it and learns that by playing with Tom Brady, he is going to become that great tight end. And he can go places with Tom that he can't go with anyone else. And so Julian Edelman does the same thing. And so these are guys that it's all about the chemistry. And so it's pairing Gronkowski with Brady. Playing with Belichick for Belichick is hard. There's nothing easy about it, right? And so at some point, some players have had enough, and they have a ring or two or three, and they've had enough of that. And so that's not a knock on Bill Belichick. I mean, I think the thing is, you realize is that all these players that leave New England, no matter how they leave, they eventually get to the point where they look back and reflect and realize how lucky they were to play there for that coach, for that owner, and with that quarterback. That, they realize that they got to do something that they couldn't do anywhere else. And that's why you don't have players who leave that organization and then look back and criticize and tear down, because that there's a family extension in New England that they all come home. Willie McGinnis and Ty Law and all those guys, they are Patriots for life. And I think that's all part of that culture.
Well, and I think it just goes to show you that winning consistently, it's not going to be easy. And it gets tiring, but I mean, it's definitely worth it. So, Jeff, my last question for you is, as far as head coaches and players, it doesn't matter what sport, what's the one takeaway that they can, get from learning about Bill Belichick, Tom Brady, and about